This meeting of Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, is a body we congregate in these council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Breeden.
We have 6 members present, so we will proceed. We have just one amendment that we need to make to the agenda, and that is the resolution for which we had the first reading at the last meeting, the resolution recognizing and thanking those who restored the M60A3 tank. We had the first reading at the last meeting, and so we need to have the second and third reading, and I would propose that we would deal with that following Ordinance 3. So prior to the introductory readings of resolutions. Is there a motion to accept that? Ms. Stevenson?
I move to amend the agenda as you have described.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have the minutes of the October 9th, 2018 meeting, which were distributed prior by email. Mr. Clark?
Move to approve the minutes as of read.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I was absent at the last meeting, so I'll be abstaining.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to accept the minutes. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Abstain.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
I vote of 5 yes, 1 abstention. The motion passes. We have 3 requests to address council, but they are not on agenda items, so we will deal with those later on. We do have reports of standing committees, the Economic Development and Community Engagement Committee regarding committee goals. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we are Committee of Economic Development and Community Engagement, to whom it was preferred our 2018 committee goals, beg leave to submit the following report. As it pertains to the Welcome to Norwood, we are completing an audit of the city website to identify what's there, what's not there. Mr. Thompson is leading this project. Anybody who's interested in providing feedback on the website can email him. His city email is ethompson@norwood-ohio.com. Our short-term goal is to make edits to the navigation. Long-term, we're looking to create a site map, launch a new website, and contract out development work. Mr. Bonsall is currently compiling a list of potential vendors and looking at other municipal site developers as well. Additionally, Mr. Breeden and myself, we're collaborating with the Quality of Life Action Group on inclusion. They as well are very interested in the welcome bag concept. Thus far, the Norwood Chamber of Commerce is willing to provide the sponsorship information to their members. And so once Mr. Breeden returns, we will be meeting with the action group to put together a cohesive request. As it relates to the work of a neighborhood association, we've been listening to the work of the action groups and have been inviting updates. And at the last meeting, we were able to learn about Cincinnati Works. Mr. Ken Wilson was with us. He shared about the nonprofit services for job seekers and employers. Earlier this month, we had 300 people over at Cintas, and they were able to apply with 49 employers. So a great resource. It's free for residents of Norwood who are interested in their service. The benefits are free lifetime career coaching and long-term mentoring. The organization provides ongoing services to ensure people not only get a job, but also advance in that job and create economic security. So Cincinnati Works, they've helped hundreds of people. They've been around for 20 years. They're privately funded. That was a point of interest in our discussion. So if you're interested in following up on their resources, you can reach them by phone at 513-744-WORK. That's 513-744-9675. And individuals can also learn about their work firsthand. So they hold information sessions every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. at their downtown location, which is 708 Walnut Street, and on Fridays from 4 to 5 p.m. at their Madisonville location, which is 4600 Erie Avenue. You can walk right in, is what it says on their website. They just ask that you be on time, and you can learn more about what they have to offer. Lastly, we discussed the quality of life planning process. As you may recall from previous committee meetings, there are action groups that are meeting every other week. Tomorrow will be the last gathering for the planning sessions. That'll take place 7 to 9 p.m. at the high school. It's located at 2020 Sherman if you've yet to join in. These planning sessions are where individuals can help prioritize goals for achieving the resident-generated vision for Norwood. The rollout of the official plan is projected for January 2019. Thus far, groups have used local and national data to generate goals. For instance, Norwood home ownership, I believe, I'm at 46? 48, it's been updated, 48%, but the national average is 64%. So one of the groups focused on housing is wanting to raise our home ownership rate. Interestingly, both of our neighboring communities, Evanston and Avondale, are both going through quality of life planning processes. They're in different stages though. And so if residents do have additional questions, you can continue to reach out to Angela at wovenoak.org or call 513-620-OAK7. That's 513-620-6257. We have with us today guests from the Community Building Institute who are going to share with us some of the data that's been compiled on Norwood's population as well as Norwood's housing trends. So at this time, I'd like to invite Valerie Daly and Emma Shirey to come and share with us about what they've been able to provide through these grant-funded services.
Thank you, Leslie. Just lean way in.
You can lift if you want. Okay, maybe not.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share some of the data that we've pulled so far. Sure. Can't be trusted with technology. Yeah. Thank you. So I just wanted to share some high-level data snapshot points that we've pulled. Some of it I think might be quite interesting, and we'll discuss a few different trends that we've tracked over the last 20 or so years to see sort of how the population of Norwood has shifted. And then I'm also going to do a quick review of some data resources that are available for anyone to look at by census tract. So all of Norwood, and then zeroing in on different pieces of Norwood. So we'll start out with a data snapshot, and I think everyone has a copy here. We can make this available online or whatever way works best for folks. But the population of Norwood is just under 20,000, and I'm going to switch to the back page here, which shows some trends. And I'll note that the population since 2000 is down just under 10%. But it has rebounded, so it dipped quite a bit from 2000 to 2010, but then has gained a little population between 2010 and 2016. So that's good news. Folks are coming back to Norwood. And then I'll move right to the home ownership question. Leslie mentioned the 48%, sorry, for home ownership in Norwood now, and it's interesting that is exactly flip-flopped from 2000. Ownership was 52% in 2000 and is now 48%, and vice versa for renter-occupied units. So there's been a little bit of a loss in owner-occupied units in that period of time. And heading back to the first page, I think one of the most interesting points that I've seen. So the number of single-person households is 3,400, a little over 3,400. And there are a total of 8,714 households. So almost half of your households are made up of just one person. Also an interesting point that married couples with children, there are 889 of them, and there's about 2,400 married couples. So most married couples living in Norwood do not have kids. And then there are just over 650 single females with children living alone in a household. Then there's a breakdown of housing units, and you'll notice the occupied units number and the household number are the same. Those correspond with one another. And then there are 1,300 vacant units. So just over 10% of all units in Norwood were reported vacant. Half of all units were built before 1939, half of all units were built after 1939. And there's more breakdown on renters and owners, and just one thing I wanted to note is that one of the measures of being cost burden is spending more than 30% of your household income on housing. So you'll notice that 47% of renters are cost burdened, while only 19% of owners are cost burdened. So renters face a much harder time looking at their income compared with the rent or mortgage that they're paying. And then also beneath that, you can see the breakdown with how much of an income was spent for both median income families and low income individuals. And again, as you might expect, the low income individuals are spending 74% of their income on housing, almost 3/4, while only 1/4 is spent by median income families on housing. And the median household income has been going up over time. It's currently just over 40,000, and there are 1,700 households living in poverty in Norwood. And so the flip side also has a breakdown of age groups comparing 2000 numbers to 2012 to 16. And I did include for the most recent year a comparison with Cincinnati and Hamilton County, so you can see the comparison there. Just a couple of things of note. We've heard in some of these planning meetings, the story that gets told, people may have moved to Norwood, have children in Norwood, but when their kids are ready for school, they move out of Norwood. So this data supports that. You can see that the number of under 5-year-old children remains pretty constant over time. There's an increase in 20 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds. So when people might be starting their families, but then when you get to 35 to 44-year-olds, there's a decline in that population, and also student age population 10 to 14. So that's just a quick snapshot, a high-level overview of demographic information in Norwood. And then I think, as interesting, sorry, this is very jumpy. So these numbers are for all of Norwood, but it's, I think, as interesting to dig into census tracts within Norwood. This is pretty hard to see, but available online for anyone to look at. So there's two maps here. One has mostly housing information and the other has demographic information. And I'll just highlight some of the functionality here. And more than anything, you can kind of see trends across time. So without anything selected here, the total number of households is just over 10,000. And then we can click on one census tract. So this is the one closest to Xavier. So you can see the renter occupied housing age. So you can see most renters are in that lowest bracket, the youngest folks. But then you can also see for this same census tract how the race and ethnicity totals break down, mostly white. Householder age, we did that. Owner versus renter units. Household size, so mostly single units here. Population and owner-occupied housing units, so most of these owner-occupied units are single-family detached dwellings. Population renter-occupied, household income, and then gross rent is a percent of income, so you can see here that most of these households are paying more than 50% in this particular census tract. And ownership costs. So that's sort of a high-level overview, and what I think is interesting is you can do a quick comparison. So if I click the census tract directly north of there, you can see how these numbers change and shift. So for example, if you wanted sort of an idea of where younger folks in your community are, married couples, where people are spending a lot on rental income, this is all 2012 to 2016 information. You can get a high level notion of that here. And then this has the same type of information, but more, did include some housing information, but more population-based information here. When householders moved into the unit, so most of Norwood was between 2000 and 2014. So you can see how that changes where there's newer or older residents with their longevity in Norwood. So I think this is just sort of a platform to present to you all. There's, I think, a lot of policy questions and decision making that could be aided by digging more deeply into this if you've got questions about sort of specific areas in the community and what the population there looks like. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And is this available to the public?
It is. So if it's possible to share this as a PDF, there are links at the bottom with each of these websites.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions? It's interesting data, very interesting. Ms. Stevenson? Oh, I'm sorry, you have a question? Mr. Moore?
I just wanted to clarify, the ending numbers on this are a window 2014 to 2016.
2012 to 2016.
2012 to 2016.
5-year estimates. So that's the most recent, best information we have. When you get to the smaller census tract geography, there is more variability, but it's sort of the best information that we have right now that's most current.
Okay, so it just doesn't, a lot has changed in the housing market across the country in the last
Sure.
3-4 years. So,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
it doesn't
this
capture
is-
that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to respond to the last comment that Ms. Daly made just around the policy work that can be done with this type of data. So for those who have been along with the process of quality life, you probably are already thinking, oh, this is the type of data we said we would be able to offer residents. And by we, I mean the steering committee and the lead agency, Woven Oak. And so there's been funding dedicated to making sure this data is available so that as plans are made by residents, it's not just, well, I like this for my street, but that there is actually concrete data, the best that's available to date. So please, everybody, participate in the census when it comes. This is what is helping us think about what really is here, not just ideas based on what we might personally like. And so I just want to lift that up to the public, so you have some more understanding of what are the action groups doing if you haven't been able to participate. It's not just saying, I want this to go there, but it's saying, oh, if we have that many vacant spaces, maybe we do need a citywide strategy for what we do with the vacant spaces. I have made a request that this PDF, which does have links at the bottom of it, be added to the public Google Doc that is holding all the public documents for the quality of life planning process. So I'm hopeful people will find it there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Any other questions or comments? Mayor White?
Can I ask you, for Leslie and you, can we look at this as taking this information and distributing it with, Andrew, Mr. Clark, you might handle this, with real estate agents, the ones who are selling the property, because property is everybody knows, is turning over really quick. And so how can we best utilize this information to promote the city with the individuals who are rehabbing the homes, plus the realtors?
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Ray, I can respond by saying that at the last action group meeting I was out, there is a housing group that has realtors in it, as well as some of our local public officials. And that group has prioritized putting together, I don't know if they exactly called it a one-pager, but a way to market housing in Norwood. So this data, when it goes into that public drive, will be available for that group of residents and stakeholders as well. But that is exactly the type of thing that they're already thinking about, which is why it was so meaningful that there was grant funding to make sure we had this type of data.
Mayor Williams.
I mean, most of us, you watch this, it's kind of like an unknown secret that houses are being transformed, purchased and transformed and sold at almost a record rate. We've had, call flippers, call them whatever you want, can come in and they're buying these homes and getting the tax incentives and then passing it on to the new buyers. And I think, because my wife and I have attended a couple of functions where we run into people, young married couples in their 30s, and one particularly said, I just missed, my wife is going to have a baby in January, February, and I just missed that house in a certain part of town. He said they only wanted 360. And our knees buckled because, they really want to be here. And, and I think this is, maybe this information can be transformed into informing them of what they're moving into. I know they want to be here, but if we can take this information and transform it and give it to them, that's a good thing.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. My final comment is simply that all of council, I believe, has been invited to join the action groups, and I believe the action group co-chairs have been provided with all of our contact info. And so when it comes to making policies or thinking about the priorities that are being made, if you're curious and don't have insight, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help connect dots, or you can reach out to Angela at wovenoak.org, because that exact type of scenario you painted, Mr. Mayor, is where I am personally very hopeful that the energy and the creativity of residents can be matched with our legislative body. And so as an example, if our housing committee wanted to think about, okay, based on the availability of houses in this part of our city, maybe we create a time-bound policy that says we won't entertain any type of CRA for developers that have a track record of selling within a certain amount of time. That's the type of strategic policy making that we could take on to start to affect the changes of getting home buyers who actually want to be here long term. So it's very exciting. I'm super grateful to CBI, to Valerie, and to Emma, and to all of the steering committee that's been working on this, because it takes a lot to get it all together, and having you here tonight, I think, is one more step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Any other comments? Thank you. Thank you very much. So we do need a motion to accept Ms. Stevenson.
I just needed to add respectfully submitted by myself, Mr. Bonsall, Mr. Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that the committee report be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to introductory reading of ordinances. The first is an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the mayor to enter into an equipment purchase and sale agreement under the state bid purchase program with Communications Venture Corporation, DBA, in digital for 911 emergency communications equipment, software license agreement, and support and maintenance agreement, and declaring an emergency. We'll note that we have people present if you need to hear from someone prior to, Lieutenant Rankin is here, the chief is here. If you need them to come up and answer any questions prior to taking any action. Mrs. Hanrahan,
I would like to ask him to come up.
could you please come forward, gentlemen?
No.
Questions? May I comment that thank you, Chief Kramer, for answering the email last week. I found your comments timely and of great interest. Thank you very much. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah. Could we ask Lieutenant Rankin or Chief Kramer, whoever, but just to talk about in general the need for the ordinance that is on the agenda tonight?
The ordinance that we're asking you to vote through tonight will approve the resolution to purchase the equipment needed to make the change in the 911 answering system that we have currently. That's being required, that's being done away with. So it's before the state can vote on the expenditure, they need council to approve the resolution.
Comments, questions, Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you. Didn't even raise my hand. We all got letters earlier this week with many concerns. I sat at a meeting with several people, including Mr. Bonzel, got a lot of our questions answered. And I do have a few...
Pull your microphone in closer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
That's usually not my problem. I'm usually loud. And I do have a couple of questions. If we went with Hamilton County, can you describe for us what prioritizing triage the calls, how that would look, and the difference between how it would look for Hamilton County if they took on our 911 and if we keep it?
Okay, so you're asking how it looks, how we answer calls?
How it looks for triage and prioritizing calls. If I'm right and I understand this correctly, we would have 2 to 3 dispatchers.
Yes.
And they would dispatch calls just for Norwood. If we go to Hamilton County, would we be triaged with 41, 42 other communities? So would we be in line and be triaged with them?
It's 43 other agencies.
And how many dispatchers do they have?
I don't know at any given time. He said
They can have, my recollection at this point is I thought they could have up to 50 to 60 dispatchers at any given time. Does that seem high?
that seems high, but I don't know, so I really couldn't speak to that.
And that'd be for how many communities?
There's 43 communities dispatched, my understanding, dispatched by the county. Let's say if they had 40 dispatchers, 43 communities, that's less than 1 per community. We have at any given time 2 to 3 dispatchers for Norwood alone.
But but they're going to prioritize calls with the whole combine of all cities, correct? Or all communities?
Yes.
We might be behind calls from other...
General prioritization would be cost of life, cost of property, and then nuisance. So,
But people in other communities, their calls could be dispatched before ours? Or how it's prioritized, I'm sorry.
they're prioritized by the emergency need.
Okay.
So if one community's having a storm and has a whole lot of 911 calls, those calls could slow the service for other communities.
Okay.
Calls come in as they come in. The dispatch is how they're prioritized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hanrahan. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Sanker?
It's kind of a follow-up from Mrs. Hanrahan's comment. There could potentially be a delay in response time here based upon the calls going to Hamilton County. They decide what type of emergency it is or how to dispatch it, and then it would be divvied out and then sent to Norwood, where presently it comes in directly to our people here. They dispatch it right away, but if there's more of an emergency for one versus another, that would take priority. But it would be dispatched here immediately once the calls come into our 911.
Yes, every PSAP has the ability to stack a parking plane, put it on hold while we're making emergency runs. But what I can tell you is that in most instances, if you call 911 in Norwood, your run is dispatched immediately. If you call the non-emergency line, your run is dispatched immediately. In agencies where they have multiple jurisdictions, more jurisdictions than they do, say, dispatchers, the call takers take the calls in, they create the incident, then they send it to the dispatcher, and then the dispatcher, it's triaged in order of necessity. So your call could come in at 5 p.m., be sent immediately over to a dispatcher, but based on necessities in other communities, it could be held for some time. So it can happen anywhere, but the more communities involved, the greater chance for that issue to happen. Does that answer a little bit?
That I do.
Questions? Want to give them a chance first?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Thanks for being here, Lieutenant Rankin and Chief Kramer. So I'd heard concerns about emergency medical dispatching in that Norwood dispatchers are not certified on that in residents. I think some residents are concerned about that as well. Could you speak on that and speak on when our dispatchers are going to be certified?
Okay, so emergency medical dispatching is a program where dispatchers receive a training program that if a caller calls and says, my husband's choking and I need to know what to do. So the program would allow for a dispatcher through professionally designed program to both quickly and professionally provide a legal way of describing the same thing to the public as that's been set forth and approved by a physician. But we're going to be using University of Cincinnati physicians to approve our EMD program. So in past, what we've done, if that case comes up, the call is transferred to the firehouse, and one of the paramedics or one of the fire personnel who's trained in life-saving techniques would then handle that particular call while the squad is en route. Now, mind you, I think our squad runs are on average about, they have a very quick response time, 3-4 minute response time for most of their runs. The state has given that guideline. We can still just transfer the call, but what we want to do is we want to have the training to where we add that value to the citizens. There's one way of doing it is just send everybody out and have the city pay for the training to have an outside agency teach every one of our dispatchers. Pay the overtime to go out and go to class, pay for the books, pay the instructor. What we decided to do is a cost-saving measure is to take one of our lead dispatchers, very, very trained and knowledgeable dispatchers, been dispatching for us for a lot of years, and send him away to school to learn how to teach that particular program. He has completed his course. We're waiting on his certificate to be mailed. Once he receives his official certification, then our EMD flip charts. We have it's just a big Rolodex that has different criteria. That's already been designed. That flip chart would then be sent. The books are already paid for. They'll also be sent, and then the classes will start. It's about I want to say 32 to 40 hours for the class, and we will teach it in-house, which is it's a cost-saving measure. So I don't have any expectation that we would go past the first of the year, which is well within the guidelines that required for our first audit in February.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here. When we've been presented basically two plans to choose between as we move forward. One of them we have here, which is the keeping 911 in-house. The other is going to Hamilton County. I kind of view them as two kind of imperfect options, and the reason I do that is because the whole point of this exercise, I believe, was to try to save money with our 911 service. And through the hard work that you've put into this, we realize that it is very difficult to save money with our 911 service. And what we end up with is two options that are either equal to or more than what we are currently paying. And I think a lot of feedback that I've heard about that is some of the frustration is directed because of just that we were looking for ways to save money, and in reality we came up with two different ways to spend slightly more money. One of the things that I think will maybe help explain some of this is if we had gone to Hamilton County, step back, the biggest way to save money in this situation is our biggest cost is our personnel and our overhead. So when we look at going to another option, the idea is, of course, because we want to try to save money on our personnel and overhead. As we looked at going to Hamilton County, we ended up keeping quite a bit of our personnel, and as a result, our overhead cost. And that is because we need clerks to operate our phones, not just our 911 phones. Would you mind just kind of explaining that, why we need to keep our clerks to answer the non-emergency numbers?
Well, one thing you said early on was that the two options both increase our costs. I would say that in part that is true. There are several programs, partnerships, and ideas that we have currently that we're working on that could and more than likely will save the city some money. But it has to be, these things take time and have to be put in place down the road. Your question as far as if we went to the county, 911 communication center is not just a 911 answering service. If it was as simple as answering a 911 call and pushing the radio and sending out police or fire, that wouldn't be a hard line to say, well, cost is easy, we just flip that over to somebody else, let them do it. Some of the things we run into is we have about 17,000 911 calls a year. Is that correct? Is that right? Sounds about right. Okay, so we get about 17,000 calls. That's calls calculated by an outside entity. That's not me counting numbers for you. So 17,000 calls. Not all those calls are dispatched as a. Some of those calls could be duplicate calls on the same incident. We did 30 some odd thousand. You probably know this number. 33. 30.
It was right around 31.
About 31,000 police calls for service. We figured around a little over 5,000 fire services, or actual fire dispatches. So we factored those calls from that. We get more than 2,500 non-emergency calls a month. Not all those calls require a police or fire assistance. Some of them require the building department, some require health, some of them require you folks, some of them want to talk to the police chief or the mayor, and we transfer calls all day long. All those calls, those transferred calls, those questions that need to be answered by someone in a position within the city are billable calls if we go to the county. So we have to maintain the ability for the public to get a hold of its services. If we decide, well, the public can't call us after 5 p.m. for any reason, they're going to find ways of getting around that. And that's if we went to the county and we decided we weren't going to answer the general landline number for Norwood after hours, they would just call the county. So our numbers would go up. I don't think it's a service to the citizens to say from this time to this time you can't get a hold of people. You can't get a hold of police or fire department. You can't ask a question. So that's part of it. There's a lot of data entry, a lot of maintenance, missing persons. If your child goes missing and you need that report has to be entered, or somebody has a warrant and they've been stopped, maybe they got cited and there's an issue with the warrant and another police agency has that person in their cruiser and we can't confirm the warrant because there's nobody there to do it. Other agencies have found ways to get around sending all their services to the county, and none of those are very attractive. And that's why the cost of maintaining, and the cost numbers that I've given you to maintain a dispatcher 24 hours a day to handle those calls, to handle those complaints, those warrant entries, the missing persons, the leads checks, the warrant checks, all the things that require somebody to have that leads or RCIC or computer training, the knowledge of our systems. Those are, that's one person maintaining that. And if we get more than 100,000 non-emergency calls a year and 17,000 911, transferring our 911 system to the county doesn't do us justice to keep just one dispatcher answer those other 100,000 calls.
Mr. Mayor, you had a comment?
Thank you. I have two issues. Number one, when you was talking about, prioritizing calls. So I understand this right, if I was explained to me right. That, for example, if you have an area where there's an accident or there's a lot of fireworks going on and the map shows that there's all kinds of dispatching runs, and then you have one up in another area, am I correct that can be separated out and looked at, or is that just?
Well, what you're referring to is the mapping system that I talked about. The mapping system that is incorporated in this particular purchase allows us to, in the event that we are inundated with calls, and I use the analogy of you have a semi-tractor trailer on 71 that catches fire, and the fire is just enormous, the smoke is everywhere, people are panicking, everybody driving on the highway is down 911. So now we're inundated with calls about the exact same incident. On certain systems, those calls can swallow a choking infant in the north end of the town they can get embedded in those same 911 calls. What our mapping system would allow us to do is allow us to select. We know we got a call on this truck on fire, and we see this cluster of calls coming from the truck. We're going to continue to answer those calls, but we're going to dedicate a dispatcher to make sure that calls that come in from other parts of Norwood are answered in a timely manner. So we don't just answer them as they come in. We can actually selectively make sure that we've got this situation being handled. Let's grab this one up here. It's just a provided service to the citizens.
And Mr. Thompson, I just want to make a comment. While you had said that our primary goal was to save money, and I think saving money is always a nice thing, particularly in a fiscal emergency, but I considered looking at this system to be how we could best continue to provide good service to our citizens, and and if we save money in the long run, that was good. But I think we're kind of forced into this situation by Cincinnati Bell getting out of the business. Is that correct? So we had to make a decision one way or the other, either to buy new equipment and keep our PSAP or do away with it.
Well, I think that yes, we are going. Our budget will go up a little bit from previous years, but that's the way of the world. But we are saving money by keeping the system over farming it out. Our options are, if we keep system, we do save money.
Thank you. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you. I agree with what Madam President just said. I think, money is a big issue. But I think looking at the level of service we'll get, not just now, not just while we're in fiscal emergency, but we have to look for decades ahead from now. For 10, 15, 20, whatever years, because that's not that long. And if we lose 111, if we decide to get rid of it, it's gone for good. And I think that's something we really need to keep in mind. And with that said, I do have several questions here. I don't want to take up all the time though. I'd like to ask, do you feel our proposed system or Hamilton County system is better, and why? I've heard a lot of discussion back and forth on that.
Okay, there's been a lot of things brought up in this, I call it hate speech anonymous letter, but the letter that was put out made a lot of allegations and didn't back up any of them. Are we better? I like to think that Norwood Dispatch is better than the county for quite a few reasons. One, we have 2 or 3 dispatchers for one community. They have a number of dispatchers, maybe as many as 1 dispatcher per community that handle their systems. In Norwood, we have the ability to, each one of you that finds a need, I guess we got a grant to research some demographics about the city of Norwood. Well, if taking these numbers and your insight, we can meld our system to meet any need that you want. The county, if dispatched by the county has policies, everybody adheres to the county's policies. We can modify our system. So I think that's a very big benefit. As far as costs go, if you tell us to find a way to save some money, we're going to look at that very hard, and we're answerable to council. We're answerable to the mayor. So you tell us find a way, it behooves us to try to find a way. I'm pretty sure any agency calls the county and says, find a way to save me some money. I don't know how hard they're going to work on that. I know that as far as answering calls, our numbers equal all the time, if not are greater. As far as, because what the state requires us to count is the 911 answering times. The time the call is answered. So you call 911, it starts ringing. How long does it take us to answer the 911 call? I know our numbers our call answer numbers are almost equal to our call dispatch numbers. I don't know that you're going to get that with an agency that has to handle multiple jurisdictions. In the event of an emergency, our call taker will immediately go to dispatch. If it's a dire emergency, our call takers are also trained as dispatchers. They don't answer the call, type it in, get it fully typed in, and then send it to another computer for somebody to read and put it out. We dispatch our non-emergencies that way. Our emergencies can be dispatched immediately by the call taker. So there's some definite time savings there.
Would you be able to speak to the actual equipment? Because I know we have emergency where we can take our suitcases.
Yes.
And move those. Could you speak to that to let people understand, so people can understand
Well,
what would happen then in case of an emergency?
Part of the system is redundancy. Say the building catches on fire, what are we going to do? How do we transfer our services? Power goes out, generator doesn't work, battery backups die, systems go down. What happens? So we have redundancy built into the system, more redundancy built into the system than the state requires, and I'm sure the county does as well. So those systems are very much the same. We'll have a backup system, so if our system goes down, it'll automatically transfer to a professional PSAP to handle our calls until we can get it back up and running again. We've had our system go down in the past. Every agency has. We've made those corrections and changes, and every day we evaluate what needs to be done to ensure that those systems don't go down. What you're referring to is our backup PSAP suitcases. Essentially what they are, as part of the program that we're getting here, is something that's unique to this area. We would be the only one that would have this particular type of system, is that each one of our dispatch terminals would have a suitcase. In the event that they had to evacuate, we can grab a suitcase, go, plug it in, it's battery powered, but we plug it in, hit a button, and be right to the calls. We can do it from the front seat of a car, we can do it from Frisch's at one of the tables, we can do it anywhere that we need to have that happen. So we have our own built-in backups. So it's a very, very unique thing to the digital program, and I think it's a definite benefit to the community.
Any other questions? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. So you mentioned two questions about the redundancy. So you mentioned the suitcases. Are those like powered off like a cellular towers, or are they powered off like Wi-Fi, or how do those suitcases then connect to our radio network, and how do they receive the 911 calls?
It has the same transmitter in them that we use to transmit our current system. It's just a smaller version. It just sends it to the towers, and our radio systems are through the Mark system are converted to work on cell tower systems. It's just the same software in a smaller package.
Okay, and then with the actual receiving the calls, is it based off, I guess, some kind of cellular or Wi-Fi, or how do the mobile command stations receive the
Same
911
way.
calls?
Well, it's sent through wireless.
Okay. And then the second, I guess, redundancy question on there. So you said that there's a professional PSAP that it would get transferred to. I guess two things. Does that professional PSAP have radio capabilities to talk to our officers? And then the second question would be, how do we get what's the process for getting those calls sent back to Norwood once our systems are back up and running?
It's just a throw switch.
A switch, okay. And then the first one about radio capabilities.
Yeah, the radio capabilities will be addressed. It's just a frequency.
You all are on Marks?
Hmm?
You're using Marks radios?
Well, the Mark system is just a way for police and fire radios to transmit across cell towers.
In jurisdictions?
Yes.
And that would be what you would use in the case
That would
of
all
an
be
emergency?
coordinated through the cell tower transfer system. It's just,
Okay, well, once we get this, I mean, once it's updated, I definitely would like to learn more to make sure that there is radio capabilities there. So when I talked to you previously, it was something that I didn't ask about, but I do want to make sure that that happens, so.
the radios that the police and fire department use, how many channels would you estimate are in these radios? Hundreds? Yeah, we have, there are, I don't know, 20 some odd channels. There are 30 or 40 radio frequencies. So we have the ability to talk to Northern Kentucky, Indiana. We can talk to state police. We can talk to other agencies on the radio systems currently. To have a direct connection radio to radio with another agency is a very simple matter to fix.
Okay, that's good.
I can tell you that after September 11th and all the planning that went on in health departments, even when I was still with the health department, every local health department was required to have Mark's radios and maintain those for the very same reason.
Communication is the primary problem with emergencies.
Absolutely.
And we've done a very good job of solving that.
Yeah, so health departments can talk to any other health department in Ohio, and as long as you know the frequencies and the channels. So it was born out of September 11th, I think, so.
Okay.
Mrs. Hanrahan, you had another question?
Yes. I know that there was some research done concerning other fire departments that went with Hamilton County, and that their cost went up, is what I'm told. And I believe that was due to additional overtime that came out of the program and something called rotation. Can you explain? Can you give us some information on that? Is that possible our overtime might go up in the fire department, and why? And what rotation is?
Well, Norwood Fire Department relies on a mutual aid agreement with some other agencies. I believe we have one with St. Bernard. Is it Gulf Manor as well, or just St. Bernard? Okay, we have a mutual agreement with St. Bernard. One of the programs that the county offers is a mutual aid agreement through the county, which means that agencies dispatched through the county would then in turn make themselves available to mutual aid to the agencies that are also dispatched to Hamilton County. So it is a benefit. I mean, if we have a fire and we need backup, we have the ability to request other agencies to back us up. Part of that mutual aid agreement that the county has, I tried to get a copy of that. Unfortunately, I guess I didn't try soon enough, but I was not able to get a copy of that policy. But essentially, they would be burdened with more mutual aid possibilities based on just the sheer larger number of communities in the program, which could cause costs to go up. If Norwood's helping mutual aid with another agency and we need Norwood here, we've got to bring in people. The same with the police. If the police have a situation going on that all the police officers are tied up, we're going to have to call in police officers.
So would this be, like, I believe if I'm not, mutual aid right now is for like a big fire or something, or is it for anything? Can this be called out for can they be called out for anything?
We did talk to Andy Knapp about that, and it's completely voluntary. So it's not an automatic rotation. I mean, if Norwood Fire did not want to be automatically dispatched to Gulf Manor or Silverton or Deer, I don't know, wherever they might be dispatched to, they don't have to be, because that was a concern. Okay. But it is voluntary.
Thank you.
Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, it's an agreement. They'd have to sign the agreement, so it would be something that would have to be agreed to.
Okay. My concern would be, could that change? So it wasn't voluntary.
Well, I think if we volunteer for the program, they also are volunteering to.
Would our fire? Would our fire department want to volunteer for the program? Does nobody knows? Oh, sorry, Mayor.
Don't know.
And I think that's something we need to know, because if that were the case, does that delay response times for us if vehicles are out, or the availability for our citizens to get the aid they need?
Well, I think that if you think of it in one very simple way, if St. Bernard needed Norwood, and then we're helping St. Bernard save a life. If Norwood needed St. Bernard would help us.
Correct.
So there is a good benefit to a program of that nature.
Of course.
Whether it raises our costs or keeps our costs the same, makes life better for the citizens of Norwood, or slows a delay here and there, that I don't know. That's for people who probably are operating in that system now. But what I can tell you, that was not taken into consideration when we run the financial figures for the two departments.
Mr. Bonsall, did you have your hand up before? I'm sorry.
Yes. So, Marilyn had alluded to, or Councilmember Henry had alluded to this, but so we originally got the notice to have a special, there was going to be a special meeting last Wednesday, and there was...
And I called that.
Yeah.
It was my understanding that we needed to get this done before, initially we were told that the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission needed to approve this first. When I found out that was not the case, that we needed to pass this first prior to their meeting, they met on, we were supposed to meet on Thursday morning. I then called for a special meeting on Wednesday to consider that. When I found out that there weren't going to be enough members present, late the next day I found that out, or the morning of the meeting, I did cancel that meeting. So I am the right hand and the left hand, and I take responsibility for that.
Yeah, there's no criticism. The people that were criticizing that are ridiculous. But the reason why I brought that up is because that kind of sparked some questions that I had specifically about the ordinance and about just our dispatch center. It also sparked some calls that I received of people that were concerned either way about moving to dispatch or moving to the county or not. So on the Wednesday, I guess last Wednesday, I had emailed Chief Wallace, Chief Kramer, Assistant Chief McCabe, and then Lieutenant Rankin about meeting to review the fire department's concerns with any future dispatch solution. And Chief Wallace, with my permission, had invited Andy Knapp, and I had invited Councilmember Hanrahan to attend as well, just because we couldn't have every council member there, and many of them were out of town. So we got to hear from not only Chief Wallace, who I very much appreciated him being able to get there so quickly, and not only Chief Kramer, but we also got to hear from Andy Knapp from the county. He came as well, and we were blessed to have him there. And so with Mr. Knapp had definitely some concerns and questions about our dispatch center, but many of the concerns though are things that are already being addressed, things that are already happening. And we kept hearing the numbers. So I've heard before too that we're going to save all this money going with the county. And even myself, when I heard that we had to, from Lieutenant Rankin, that we needed $400,000 to have clerks staffing, 24/7, I was very skeptical of that originally. To me, it seemed like it was excessive. That do we really need the clerks? Couldn't we have somebody that's here or a supervisor do some of those functions? But we got to hear from Chief Kramer at the meeting that there's many other communities that have clerks on, even though they have the dispatch done through Hamilton County. And so Coleraine Township is an example of that. They have 24-hour coverage on the weekdays, and then they have significant coverage on the weekends, but not overnight hours. And Coleraine Township spends an extra $325,000. Chief Kramer was able to get that number for me just on clerks, and those clerks don't answer 911 calls, so it's just an extra expense. And so for me, I guess looking at this, and like I said, I've talked to Andy Knapp even just yesterday, and he answered additional questions that I had and was able to communicate things that are happening. And to me, keeping our 911 center is not something that we're doing because it's convenient. It's something that we're doing because for right now, it's the right decision to do, and that it keeps the options open. Not only is it the right decision for right now, it keeps the options open for our future elected officials. So the issue is that if we were to disband this 911 center and move to the county has the ultimate control over any new PSAPs that are created. And it's pretty much guaranteed that if we were to give up our PSAP, they're never going to allow us to have it again, because the state is moving to the direction of having just large multi-jurisdiction PSAPs dispatching as much as possible. They don't necessarily like us having a small PSAP, but the thing is that the small PSAP serves our citizens very well. It serves our citizens at a reasonable cost comparative to the services that are provided. And these people are local and they understand our streets, they understand where things are, and so if, you know, I've heard mentioned in this anonymous email about the Kyle Plush situation, and I truly believe that if Kyle Plush had called the Norwood Dispatch Center, that they would have got to him. And I think that because there's so few places in Norwood, because we're a smaller city, that you say something like a key. I forgot what he said exactly on the transcript, but our dispatchers would have recognized that place and would have sent them there. Even though they didn't know exactly where he was, they would have sent officers there. And so, you know, just kind of going through all of this, I mean, I truly believe it's the right decision to keep this dispatch center here, and it's going to be the right decision to use the solution that was mentioned. So InDigital is a hosted solution, so we don't have all of this crazy hardware and stuff down in our basement. It's a kind of a cloud-based solution, which allows us to have the mobile command centers and the mobile dispatch, boxes where we can dispatch from anywhere. It allows us to have additional redundancies. So to me, this seems like the best decision forward. And you know, if there's a future mayor that wants to go out there, I know our mayor is pretty passionate about keeping our dispatch center. If there's a future person out there that wants to look at that in the future, the costs are almost all operational. They're almost all personnel. So if somebody wants to look at and adjust it in the future, they can do that. We're giving them that option. But if we were to go and say we're going to defund our dispatch center and that we're only going to fund dispatch services through the county starting February 1st, 2019, we are taking that option away for anybody to consider this in the future. And right now, I think that the costs are comparable enough that, and the services are definitely superior, that we should not vote to do that. So I am going to, however many readings we want to do tonight, I am going to be supporting that, and I will be supporting keeping our dispatch center here in Norwood.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other comments?
The mayor.
It's your meeting, you go first. And I'll
Thank
let
you.
you know when it's your turn, Mr. Mayor. Mrs. Hanrahan.
I have to agree that I think keeping our 911 in-house is the way to go. After this letter last week, and it posed a lot of questions for us, we went out to get the answers, and I know I sat in several meetings, several hours each meeting, and I do believe this is the best option for this city at this time.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Any other questions? Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't have a question, but I do have a couple of comments. The first is, thank you. This has been a long conversation, and I know that you all, Chief Kramer and Lieutenant Rankin, have been working on this information before you presented it to us. So I want to say thank you. That's my first comment. My second comment is back in, I think, May, and then more recently, we had an alternate type of presentation, and I abstained from voting in favor of moving forward. And really it's because I didn't really understand what was being compared. I think the conversation, the longer it's gone on, I've become more aware that the way you track the benefit of service is different from analyzing the cost of service that could be acquired if we were to go with the county. And so I want to appreciate your time and your best efforts to help us understand. I like to think of myself as a smart person, but I've learned a lot, and I'm appreciative of being able to learn what you know, what is your field, what is your expertise. So I want to say thank you for making time to meet with me to walk through some things. And I also just want to publicly say how much I appreciate your willingness to accept feedback as well. When we did meet, we were able to talk through the prevention side of things as well. And I really appreciated that openness. I think we're all very aware accidents happen, emergencies happen, but some can be prevented. And so I just want to affirm your openness to that and data you did provide to help me think about that for my ward. And then my last comment is I just want to appreciate this body and the conversation. I wasn't in every conversation that's been had, but as I've caught up from getting back in town and even been in these meetings in our regular sessions. Just want to appreciate the deliberation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Mr. Clark, did you?
Yeah, I just want to thank Lieutenant Rankin as well, and Chief Kramer, and everyone that's been involved. I feel like Lieutenant Rankin went out of his way to provide every possible answer to any possible question that we would have. So I just want to thank him for that. I too will be supporting keeping our 911. I think just with the information that we've been presented, I think this is just the best option for us at this time. The amount of service that we will keep in-house, I think, is just essential for me. I do think we did approach this looking to save money, and I just don't think the numbers are there for what we were hoping. So I think it just makes sense for me to support keeping 911 here in Norwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any other comments? Mr. Mayor.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Couple of things. Number one, the gentleman here took this to our state auditors, and Anna Mary and April Davis reviewed it before we went to them. So the state looked at this. The other issue is that the possibility of the county raising the dispatch calls from $2 to $3 is going to happen. Now, do I think they're threatening $3 and saying $2 to make everybody feel like they've got a good deal? Probably. But it's going to go up. They have to. They're going under. And so that's part of it. The last thing I heard it mentioned about the fire department. That fire department's got a long history. That fire department's not going to go out of the city and leave us unprotected. That will never happen. It'll be taken care of no matter what. They will go if asked. Cincinnati will come in if asked. St. Bernard will come in and ask. So in effect, we have mutual aid now. Cincinnati came into the fire on Grove Avenue, and they've come on a few more. And so there's mutual aid with St. Bernard. So it is a working system, but I can assure you that no matter how this goes, they will not leave this city unprotected. And the last thing, is the anonymous letter. I am sure that no member of our safety services wrote this letter. I am positive of that, because I think our people have courage, and I don't think any member of our first responders would stoop so low and have the less courage to send this. So I don't know where it came from, but I think our first responders have got more courage than that. In this, the courage of the individual who wrote this, it's not the mayor's 911. I've been in favor of, because I know what works and what doesn't work when it comes to that area because of years. And I also know that it's been reviewed on 3 or 4 times at least. Every time there's a problem, every time there's a financial shortage, this issue comes up, and every time it comes up, it is totally reviewed. And every time it comes up and reviewed, we keep it. So I put the 911 in the system. I put it in the financial plan to review it. Nobody else did. I did, because I knew it was going to come up. And so by doing that, by putting it in the plan, we therefore look into it. And if we save $500,000 or $600,000, it's gone. But that's the way I felt about it, is we'll put it in the plan and see what people want. So that's the way it worked. But I know there was issues in here about transparency. We've been as transparent as you can get. There's been no secret meetings. Mr. Gears and I sat in a few with Andy Knapp. Andy Knapp, of course, would like to hear this, but Andy Knapp said, I'll work with you, I'll do whatever you have to do. Could there be a benefit for us working with the county if something pops up down the road? There could be a little bit of cooperation where between the two of us, once this is decided, we'll be even better. Am I saying something out of?
Not at all.
And so they could have a seat in there. They could put somebody in there. So we've got this mutual thing that could happen. Because if something goes wrong with the county, we can support them. Or we can support part of their area. So there's there's mutual benefits that can transpire down the road. And I know it's tough, and I know you've been bombarded by that, I'm going to mention it, and these anonymous emails. If you'll notice, as much discussion, the people that sent these emails or nobody else, they're not here. You don't see them. You're here. And you're the one that's going to make the decision. But I appreciate everybody's time and the questions that you ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, you are. Thank you. Any other questions of either Chief Kramer or Lieutenant Rankin? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. We will now move on to consideration of the ordinance. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the mayor to enter into an equipment purchase and sale agreement under the state bid purchase program with Communications Venture Corporation, DBA and Digital, for 911 emergency communications equipment, software license agreement, and support and maintenance agreement, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that we have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
I would like to respectfully ask council to consider doing 2 readings tonight. My microphone sounds real weird to me. I'm sorry. It's feedback. Doing 2 readings tonight and having 1 reading. Perfect time would be in 2 weeks at our next council meeting, but I would be open to a special council meeting in a week, only because this is the exact kind of ordinance that I feel like we don't want to rush through on suspending rules. It's an expensive piece of legislation. I think we all probably support it, but we have these procedures in place where we have 3 readings so that our citizens are allowed to come in and comment and digest these things that we're presenting to them. For us sitting here, this is kind of an old, we've been dealing with this for quite a while. We think about it, we've had meetings about it, but for our citizens, they had exactly 2 days warning on an emergency meeting last week, and then a shift to this week where we want to do this. So I would respectfully ask that we would consider doing 2 readings, giving it a cursory amount of time to allow community feedback in this forum, not any other forum where we get plenty of community feedback, but in this proper forum, and then have the final reading at a soon to follow date.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the comments of Mr. Thompson, and I'd say that citizens have had a lot more time on this because we've talked about this now for the past 6 to 8 months. It seems like we've had presentations and various things. However, we have a great, perfect special council meeting. It's a perfect time already scheduled tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
The right hand and the left hand called it.
Yes, so I appreciate that, Madam President. So I am willing to amend my motion to do 2 readings tonight, and then we can do the 3rd reading at a future council meeting.
Well, first of all, Mr. Sanko, if he amends his motion, will you amend your second to have 2 readings?
I will.
Discussion. Mr. Thompson.
I appreciate the motion. I would like more time, but in the interest of cooperation, I will agree to support a move for a 3rd reading tomorrow, a special meeting.
I was going to say, we do have a special meeting called for Wednesday and Thursday. Lieutenant Rankin, comments? Come up to the microphone so people can hear you.
I had a great deal of concern with pushing it out for 2 more weeks. My understanding is that the state is meeting November 1st.
Correct.
To finalize their end of this.
It was the only date that we could agree to get enough people to make sure that there was a discussion and votes.
There is a
to pass
substantial amount of time needed for the implementation. Voting to approve the resolution is one step. We still have to work the financing out. We still have to purchase the equipment, install it, do the training, get it up and running.
Right.
So, yeah, if we can handle the third meeting tomorrow, that would be wonderful. If we're going to purchase this system, I need to get it installed.
Thank you. Any other comments, Chief? Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Of course, appreciate that. And again, I've said this before in other council meetings. I want us to try to do better about the timing of our ordinances so that we are not governing by suspending rules, especially on major pieces of legislation like this. That being said, I understand the kind of time crunch we're on, and I'm willing to work with crunch time, but I think we probably could have gotten this a month ago and had 3 decent readings, knowing that we've been working on it since January. So rather than waiting till the last minute in the future, I would ask those who submit and give us ordinances to review, please consider giving us time to actually follow the processes that are put forth by the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have 2 readings of the ordinance this evening. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
By a vote of 6-0, the motion passes. Please have 2 readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the mayor to enter into an agreement, purchase, and sale agreement under the State Bid Purchase Program with Communications Venture Corporation, DBA, in Digital for 911 emergency communications equipment, software license agreement, and support and maintenance agreement, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the mayor to enter into an equipment, purchase, and sale agreement under the State Bid Purchase Program with Communications Venture Corporation, DBA, in Digital for 911 emergency communications equipment, software license agreement, and support and maintenance agreement, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. We will move on to ordinance number 2, an ordinance consenting to the project ID number 94224, the repair and maintenance of the Section Avenue Bridge over State Route 562, and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into contracts with the Director of Transportation for the State of Ohio necessary to complete the project and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, just a question for the Safety Service Director.
Mr. Gears, could you come forward, please?
Mr. Ears, I was just wondering when the time frame when their contract runs out from the previous time we had passed this for that bridge to when the new contract would kick into place.
What you're talking about, the ODOT contract on, and what they are proposing or requesting. They want to do some work on the Section Avenue Bridge that crosses 562, the Norwood lateral. Since the bridge is in the city of Norwood, what they do is need our permission to work on it. And once that job is done, then they're done. And it would be similar, from what I remember, when they did the Beach Street Bridge over 562, and that was a major overhaul. Once they started looking into it, they found the metal piers and the support beams were rusted, so they basically redid that whole bridge. In that case, and there is no shared cost that I could read in any of the information here. But to kind of answer your question, the project, the project has proposed third quarter state fiscal year 2020 sale date. So they won't even put that out for bid until the year 2020. And it's just proposed. But before they can move forward with it, they just asked for our permission or, in our agreement that there is no problem with us, them doing work on that. If you go back about 4 years ago, the 562 overpass that goes from Reading Road up to Section Avenue, they did all the work. They did all kind of resurfacing and that. But at the same thing, we had to do an ordinance, just an agreement, agree and let them do the work in Norwood. That's all it is.
And I can tell you from working with ODOT with the Safe Routes to Schools, they move very slowly and they have engineering and they do all kinds of background work. So it's a couple of years out from the time you give them permission or when you apply that they actually do the project. So it sounds like the same thing happens here.
About the same, yeah.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam President. I had a question to Mr. Gears, if possible. So do you need us to approve this ordinance tonight? Do you just need a first reading tonight? What would help to make this to make sure that this happens on time?
I think you could, if you so desire, you can just do one reading. I mean, they're not on that close of a what do you want to say, time schedule if we're looking at the year 2020. So, but I mean, we don't want to delay it too long because, they've got to do all the engineering work in order to get it together.
All the right-of-ways and all that.
Yeah. And I would just say, kind of answer Mr. Sanker's question, and, we get different proposals, and I know we had one, which we didn't even bring to council, is they were willing to blacktop the state highway 561 going through Norwood, but we would have to pay 80% of the cost. And they said, well, that's a pretty good deal. Well, by the time we started figuring out how much money that was going to be, we were at a lot of added expenses. So, I mean, some things, we present the stuff that really is at no cost to the city.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Gears.
You're welcome.
Much pleasure. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I'd move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have the first reading.
Ordinance consenting to the project ID number 94224, the repair and maintenance of the Section Avenue Bridge over State Route 562, and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into contracts with the Director of Transportation for the State of Ohio necessary to complete the project and declaring an emergency.
Next is ordinance number 3, an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the mayor to enter into an agreement with S&S Healthcare Strategies Ltd. to provide third-party administration services for healthcare reimbursement claims from November 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019, and declaring an emergency. I can tell you that I had requested that this ordinance be prepared. Our contract with Benovation, I can say personally, thankfully, will be over October 31st, 2018, having worked with them the last 2 years to try to clean up the mess. That they are getting out of the business, so it's not like they were unhappy with us, it's that they are getting out of the business of third-party administration. So I wanted to make sure that the retirees were going to get all of the payments, back payments that were due them from 2016, 2017, and those that they incurred this year. S&S Healthcare has been working on 2018, unbeknownst to us. Benovation subcontracted with them to do the work for the 2018 claims. So therefore, they set up, when Benovation says we had an old system and now we have a new system, the new system was set up by S&S Healthcare. So they are not going to miss a beat. It's their system that was developed that the old claims are now into. I have been assured that Benovation will transfer any unpaid or any unresolved claims from 2016 and 2017 to SNS Healthcare Strategies, and that SNS Healthcare Strategies will take total responsibility. They will work from November 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019 to handle those claims. In the past, we have allowed people 2 years to submit claims. That was just an agreement that we had. That is not state law. Somebody told me that was, and I found out it wasn't. It was simply our contract with the retirees. In order to try to get this resolved and done with, not only for us, but especially for the retirees, we have agreed to do this through December 31st of 2019. So when the new committee is formed and the applications are sent out, we will let the retirees know, if this is passed, that we want them to get their claims from 2018 in as quickly as possible, because we want it resolved and we want it ended. I am amazed that this company will do this. They have no setup fee because everybody's in the system, and it's $8.50 per retiree per month. And I know we're paying a lot more than that right now. But that also includes some stop loss coverage, but we'll have to talk about that under unfinished business. But I asked them point blank, will this cover the unresolved claims from 2016 and 2017, and their answer was an unequivocal yes. You will notice that in the letter that was sent to us, that the vice president of this company gave us his email and his cell phone number, which he answers. So it's with that information that it's presented to you. There is an urgency for this. We've talked about this for several weeks, but it took until, and I want to compliment Julie Topol from Haran. She has done the lion's share of this work with me and has communicated with this company. So it would be my advice to you, or my suggestion that you do pass this evening, so that we can make sure that the retirees have uninterrupted health care coverage. Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion to have all three readings this evening.
Is there seconded by Mrs. Hanahan? Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be voting yes to have all three readings tonight for the reasons that you mentioned, that we've got to get this done. I mean, on this one, I mean, it was not we had no idea that Benovation was going to give us that termination. And I mean, the fact that this has been turned around and a contract ready to go, I think it's been like 3 weeks, it seems like.
I think Benovation gave us the notice. They had to give us a 30-day notice, and so they did that.
Yeah, so appreciate how fast everybody moved on this so that we can have uninterrupted coverage for our retirees. So, yeah, I'll be voting yes on the three readings.
Again, I apologize that you do, if you do have to suspend the rules. This has been as quickly as we could get this done, and it has been through. You don't even want to talk to my husband. Every time my phone rings, he goes crazy, because Julie has been really working on this, and I really appreciate her assistance on this. So, any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
With all members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all three readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the Mayor to enter into an agreement with SNS Healthcare Strategies Limited to provide third-party administration services for healthcare reimbursement claims from November 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the Mayor to enter into an agreement with SNS Healthcare Strategies Limited to provide third-party administration services for healthcare reimbursement claims from November 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service Safety and/or the Mayor to enter into an agreement with SNS Healthcare Strategies Limited to provide third-party administration services for healthcare reimbursement claims from November 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2019, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hainerhan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to the resolution which was added. It was a resolution which we had the first reading of at the last meeting, a resolution recognizing and thanking those who restored the M60A3 tank and cleaned up and planted flowers at Victory Park in observance of the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day on November 11th, 2018. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we have the second and third readings of the resolution.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hainerhan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all the second and third reading.
Resolution recognizing and thanking those who restored the M60A3 tank and cleaned up and planted flowers at Victory Park in observation of the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day on November 11th, 2018. Resolution recognizing and thanking those who restored the M60A3 tank and cleaned up and planted flowers at Victory Park in observation of the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day on November 11th, 2018.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we pass the resolution.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. For just anybody that didn't see the last meeting, we actually had most of the people that helped to restore the tank at Victory Park and kind of restore it to the original color scheme that it would have been when it was in combat. And so we really appreciate them. However, we didn't have enough council members at that meeting to suspend the rules. So we're going ahead and doing that tonight and getting it officially passed, just in recognition of the great work they did.
And they continue to work up there. They were up there this past weekend cleaning the brakes on it and planting flowers. If you should go up, it's amazing. They did all the weeding, pulled all the spring and summer flowers out and planted some fall flowers. So they continue to work on that project. Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to pass the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hainerhan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a resolution authorizing the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. Mr. Stith, did you want to provide some background for this?
Thank you, Madam President. This is a routine part of our budgetary process. It's passed every year at this time. As you remember, back in May and June, we addressed and passed the tax budget for 2019 as required by the county. We then file that tax budget with the county. They look at any levies that the city has available, and then they send back the estimates of what the actual tax collections are going to be for next year, as well as some of other forms of revenue, such as local government funds. By us accepting this in a resolution, we're saying, yes, we understand this is the amount of money that we are going to be getting in property tax, and we agree to take this. And it shows our rates and amounts that we will be receiving.
Thank you, Mr. Stith. And is there a deadline?
Yeah, the deadline's this week.
And you got this, just got this.
We got this about 3 weeks ago and then filed it with the clerk of council's office right before, after the last packet went out. So I think that they got it on Monday of last Tuesday's meeting. We knew we could wait till this week. As this is a yearly thing that is part of our budgetary process, we felt that it probably would not be something that required 3 readings.
It does, but you do need it.
At separate meetings.
Oh, got you. Okay, I thought you said it didn't require 3 separate
No,
readings, but you said
separate-
meetings. I'm sorry.
Separate meetings for
Gotcha.
3 separate readings.
Gotcha, thanks. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear about the timeline. So we didn't get the tax the amounts and rates from the county auditor until just 3 weeks ago. So we just got this
I'd have to look at the letter that I got, what the date that it was sent, but that's when it was in my office was. It was prior to the last meeting by about a week, yeah.
Okay, great.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. This is the first time I've been a part of the process, and I'd love to ask the auditors to walk through the Schedule A and B and what is on here.
Sure, I can do so.
Thank you.
Okay, Madam President.
Sure.
So this is a county form. The most important schedule that's on here is the one that, let's see if we can see the actual number on it. The budget settlement that says the general fund upcoming tax year 2018 at the top on the left side. And what it does is it shows the two existing levies that the city has, the inside levy, a 3.4 mil levy, and the outside levy, the emergency levy that's been renewed every 5 years, which is the 8 mil levy. It then shows the amounts that will be collected from each one of those levies and the totals. And if you look down into the box where it talks about the tax summary, the actual amounts that are collected in taxes, less the rollback homestead amount, and basically senior residents in Hamilton County and the state of Ohio have the ability to get a rollback on their property taxes, and then that's reimbursed to the community by a program from the state. And that's where it says less homestead rollback, $207,369, and then it shows the net levy of $2,561,590. But then the state reimburses us that exact amount of the rollback, the $207,369, to make our total gross levy proceeds from the two tax levies that we have being $2,768,959. If we look at how much has actually been received year to date, this year we have brought in 2018 $2,719,947. So this is about a $49,000 increase. There were reassessments on properties 2 years ago and last year, which would probably account for most of that change. Moving over to that bottom right-hand section on this, these are numbers basically pulled from our tax budget and other ones confirmed by the state itself. With our revenue, our income tax, or it said earnings tax, they have it as an income tax, but what we have here is an earnings tax of $17,200,000. The liquor and beer permits of $44,000 is actually about $2,700 less than what we had projected from previous years, but the county's projecting that to be $44,000 coming in. These other totals, when we talk about taxes and permits, charges for services, these are things that are listed as our general revenue under our tax budget. And then over on the right-hand side, the local government funds, $288,512. That's the money that is the county sales tax that's collected and sent to the state, and they divvy it up and give it back to us, and that the state decided to start keeping about 8 years ago, the majority of it. So we have seen a reduction in that. It used to be $800,000, and it is $288,000. It's been pretty consistently in about that, between the $250,000 and $300,000 range for about the past 6 years. These totals coming in do change the amounts that were put in the earnings, or in the revenue forecast that was provided last month, the one that was made on September 15th. It does change some minor things. The local government funds is adjusted there. I think it goes up about $18,000. And as I said, there's a decrease in the alcohol tax, and also some adjustment in the amount of the earnings tax. So as we're moving towards January of this year, and we're looking at creating our certificate of estimated resources that looks at all revenues for the city projected for 2019, we are kind of constantly adjusting that 5-year forecast to reflect new numbers as they come in like this. And as we start to see these, we're coming up with a better number so that at the end of January, when the certificate is made, we'll have a better projection of how much exactly we have to spend next year. Roughly, just based on what's here, the gross revenue is going to be about $21,500,000 for next year. If we end with the negative balance initially projected by the state in the fiscal emergency plan of negative $1.2 million, it's going to allow us $2,330,000 or $20,330,000 to pay for the general fund expenses next year. Although I seriously doubt that we are going to be negative $1.2 million. I think it's going to be significantly lower than that. So we'll probably have about $21 million next year, the way it looks now. As we close out October, we are working with the state. We plan to have another meeting with them within the next 2 to 3 weeks, looking at our October numbers and projecting the last 2 months of total expenditures and looking at the current appropriations and seeing where some money can be shifted within the appropriations. There have been some expenditures that have been made outside of appropriations as directed by the state, and we need to make those corrections. So probably the second meeting in November, you'll be seeing an appropriations ordinance for changing the appropriations for 2018, mostly reflecting some things like making settlements on real estate taxes, as well as some other expenditures that we were instructed to make. So you'll see some adjustments made there, but the overall amount of appropriations will not change. It should be a zero-sum change. Also, our goal in working with the Finance Committee is to have, at that meeting, the second meeting of November, the permanent appropriations for 2019 that can be given 3 readings in November and then the 2 in January. What we're putting together for that is
2 in December.
Oh, 2 in December, yes. Sorry. I was getting ahead of myself. Yeah, that would be bad. What we're doing right now, and I'll be sending off to the state in the next 2 days or so, is taking the current fiscal emergency plan and converting the 2019 fiscal emergency plan as it stands into the initial appropriations for 2019. And then after the year's closed out and the state looks at things and Finance Committee can look at things, we'll be adjusting the appropriations probably come March when they adopt a new fiscal emergency plan and adapting it to match that new plan. Sorry, I went a little off track.
Thank you, Mr. Sith. Which pleasure with this resolution? Mr. Sanker.
I recommend we have all 3 readings of the resolution.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have one question. Unlike most ordinances or resolutions we see, we've got our names expressly included. Do we need to initial these? Or is this just indicating our attendance when this was passed?
No, the clerk of council takes care of that, and he has to then record your votes as well. So he just checks that you're present, and then he records your votes. He takes care of all that for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, though. That's a good question that no one's asked before. People just kind of take that for granted, so thank you for asking that. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor.
Mr. Bonso.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that we pass the resolution.
Seconded by Mr. Sanker. Is there any discussion? Mr. Bonso.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just as the auditor said, we have to pass this. This is something that we're required to do in order to move things along with our 2019 budgeting process. So I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Bonso. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Senker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Finally, our last resolution is a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a lease purchase agreement for the purpose of financing emergency communications equipment for public safety with Government Capital Corporation and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonso.
Thank you, Madam President. Since this one matches up with our the first ordinance that we had the first two readings on, I would move that we have the first and second reading of the resolution.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Senker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have the first and second reading.
Resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a lease purchase agreement for the purpose of financing emergency communication equipment for public safety with Government Capital Corporation and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a lease purchase agreement for the purpose of financing emergency communication equipment for public safety with Government Capital Corporation and declaring an emergency.
We have no administration reports. We have other requests to address council. Thank you for sitting through all of this, all of you. The first is John Capella and Jason Province. If you will come forward, please give us your names and address, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
Madam President, fellow council members, thank you for the time and the opportunity to speak. Appreciate the civics lesson again as well. John Capella, I live at 4149 Forest Avenue. I am here to make you guys aware of and invite you to the inaugural Gym of the Highlands 5K on November 10th at 8:30 a.m. It will start on Floral near the intersection of Washington. And a group of neighbors, 7 or 8 of us, have formed an executive committee to put this race on. I think I was recruited and nominated because I'm the race director for the Flying Pig Marathon and have some experience putting on races, certainly in the community. Our mission is to build community by bringing together residents who are proud to call Norwood home while giving back and improving the neighborhood. Proceeds from this year's race are earmarked to improve the parks. I know there's an Adopt a Park program underway, but proceeds from each additional race, we want to invest in Norwood to make a certain part of Norwood better. So while it's the parks this year, we're certainly open to other projects in the future. Really what we want as a group of Norwood residents, we want an event that will make the Norwood community proud, while also showcasing our community to folks who may want to consider living here or doing business here as well. So I think that's our mission overall. Registration is open. Mr. Bonzel is registered, so I think he might challenge all of you guys to a race on November 10th. But norwoodrun.com is our website. We're also looking for volunteers and sponsors, so if any of you aren't runners or walkers, would certainly invite you there. Last thing I want to do before I hand it off to Jason is also call out the Norwood Police and Fire Associations. They are stepping up to combine to be our title sponsors of the race. And just want to commend them for leading our community in the effort to put on this race and to help us out as we do so.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks, Council, for having me today. I'm Jason Provins at 4113 Floral Avenue. I'm also the Executive Director of Off Pike Market, and we were just super excited when John and his group said, hey, we want to bring community together and throw a 5K run. Because Off Pike Market is about community. We're about bringing community and business together. We started in Norwood in 2017, and we held 3 different markets where we have local vendors that are just starting out, wanting to maybe have a business someday. So we help them basically enter the marketplace, test their products. We're also partnering with Xavier to help kind of drum up some business and economic development for Norwood. So on race day, after you're done running, you can stop by our market. We'll be open from 9 to 2 on Floral Avenue. We'll have about 20 merchants there, from jewelry to donuts, basically. Anything you might want. They're great quality goods. And we'll also have some programming for people. So the Norwoodians are going to be playing. We've said that the weather is going to be good. We're not going to allow any bad weather to happen that day. And then after the Norwoodians, the Historical Society is going to give us a talk about the history of Floral Avenue and kind of the history of Norwood. And then it'll end up with the encore from Avenues from Success, the Lion King Jr. If you missed the show, you'll get a chance to hear them sing a song or two. Phenomenal show. My wife and I went, so we're excited to have them.
Great. And what's the date of that again?
November 10th.
Okay. For both of these.
Yep.
Great. Any questions or comments, Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Madam President. I just want to say thank you to both of you all and the executive team with the Gem of the Highlands. I am very much excited about having a signature event like that here in the city. And I'll just talk about the weather. Every year in the area where my family lives, I run a 5-mile race on Thanksgiving Day, and it can be chilly that day. But when you're like participating, walking, running in a race, like it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's fine. So I'd say the weather shouldn't matter. Just get on out there and support the race. So.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sanker?
Yes. Is it a 5K run only, or is it 5K run walk?
Run.
Okay.
So families, anybody?
Strollers, dogs, you name it.
Great. All right. Great. Well, I guess we're all challenged now. Thank you.
More ways than one.
Exactly. Next is Pat Bruns. Again, if you'll come forward and give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Wants to speak on education reform at the State Department of Education.
Good evening. My name is Pat Bruns. I live at 4540 Glenway Avenue in Price Hill. And I'm delighted to be here this evening to give you a bit of an update about what we've been up to at the State Board of Education. I've been listening with great interest this evening to your discussion. I was a longtime volunteer for Price Hill Will in my neighborhood, and Valerie Daly actually worked with our community when I was on the board, and I was eventually the president at one point. So this all sounds like familiar conversation to me, so I appreciate all your good work as well. I'm a career art educator, and I really believe that in 40 years of being in education, we're really at a crossroads in Ohio's education system. That's why I'm delighted to be here. We're moving out of the No Child Left Behind era, which I believe was excessive testing and overarching regulations. And we last year adopted the Ohio Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaces that. It's much more meant to be a framework. It represents $1 billion that we get from the federal government for title money. It also has near and dear to my heart. We expanded to 8 sections in the plan to address well-rounded education, which by federal definition includes the arts. We've just completed a year-long process to adopt a 5-year strategic plan. It involved over 1,400 stakeholders. So when you're talking about having community involvement, certainly that's the way to do it, to have buy-in. It's a 5-year plan that's a framework rather than mandates for local school districts to develop their own local improvement plans. We believe that all students are unique. They have unique needs. Unique resources are necessary for them to reach their potential in this new plan. So it's gets away from that cookie cutter approach. I'm also, I was on the steering committee for that, and they also had a work group I was on called Excellent Educators and Instructional Practices. Currently, I'm working on 2 work groups, graduation requirements. We continue to have, in the opinion of many, a mismatch between the state testing, the current report card requirements, and student achievement. And so we're trying to move away from that. I can't go into all of that tonight. Too many hours of meetings. And finally, I'm also on a report card review committee. And that is intended to, again, remove away from the reliance on strictly testing as a determination of graduation and growth, and rather try to tell a fuller profile of what our school districts are doing. Because there's so much good work doing at the local level. I'm in touch with all my superintendents. I met with one of your board members yesterday, as a matter of fact, to talk about some issues. And I'm glad to report that the issues that you have in Norwood schools are the issues that we are addressing through these reform efforts I've just outlined. So I appreciate a moment to come and just give you an update. And again, I'm Pat Bruns, State Board of Education. Thank you.
Mr. Bonsall.
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, I have two questions. So, sorry, snuck that second one in there. The first thing about the report cards, one of the board members, Brandon Atwood, is that who you met with?
That's who I met with, actually. Yes.
Yeah, he's been, he's been very involved. He had mentioned something about the State Board of Education not taking into account socioeconomic data when factoring in state report cards. And to me personally, it's a concern because you've got school districts like Cincinnati Public Schools and even Norwood schools that serve a population of students that are already going to be disadvantaged because of where the places that they're coming from. And I'm personally concerned that our schools are getting a bad rap, on these state report cards because they're serving students that it's harder to, there's harder students to serve. And so I'm just wondering if you could just talk into why is socioeconomic data not brought up with that, or why is it not considered in that?
Well, I think that's a great point you've made, and actually that's part of our considerations. That we want to, again, when I talk about telling the complete profile of a school district, it should include those things. Taxpayers, for instance, don't know that students on IEPs with disabilities are by federal law allowed to stay in school till they're 22, age out 22. Even if they've completed all the graduation requirements in 4 years, that's a ding for the school district. So we're taking a deep dive look at all of that stuff, and that's exactly the kinds of things that we want to address so that taxpayers, parents, business get a complete picture of what our schools are actually doing. And we really want to place more emphasis on, because students come to us with all different needs and different ability levels. Some of our schools don't, students, come and maybe haven't been in and out of school for whatever reason. They might be a little bit behind grade level. So we want to make sure that the teachers and the district are given credit for where that student starts and the amount of progress that that student is making, and that they're always moving forward. And exactly right, and we'll keep working on that.
Yeah, and that's great because there's some unintended effects, I guess, or maybe they are intended, of these letter grades, because we talked about it earlier today with the data, how we have quite a few families that they'll raise their kids here until their kids get to school age, and then they'll go move out to another school district. Mm-hmm. And where some of those students probably would have done just as well in the Norwood school district as they're doing at whatever school district that the parents think that they're doing better in. So just a concern there, just make sure that we get that addressed. And then the second question would be about graduation changes. And Mr. Atwood had expressed that he's concerned that there could be some graduation changes that are going to affect seniors that would be graduating in 6 months in May. And so could you just address, do Norwood parents have to be concerned about their child potentially not graduating under what they currently think are graduatable, requirements?
So the legislature sets the law, and in law we have pathways to graduation, which are essentially you have to go through those end of course tests and get 18 points. This is the big problem. So last year, well, actually in fall of 16, superintendents started telling us that they were having problems with that, and they were noticing that they had a large number of students that might not graduate. So we were able to move through a resolution that got adopted by the legislature for 1 year for the class of 18 options. That was a 1-year fix. Then we moved into the long-term graduation requirements that we know we need so that students can demonstrate mastery in a variety of ways, not just a test, not just a one-time snapshot of a test. Those recommendations, we're going to vote out of the board next month, and we're going to present them to the lame duck session in hopes that they will pass them. But people have to understand that we're still living under the state law graduation requirements, which does put a number of students in jeopardy. I'm hearing all the same stories all over that we heard in 16. We know we need to make changes, but it will require a conversation with the legislature to do that. And, there aren't any guarantees for that, for the lame duck session.
Great. Yeah, I know that Mr. Atwood's going to be paying attention to that, so
Yeah.
I'll be listening to when those changes come up, but I just think that...
He's got me on speed dial now.
Excellent. Yeah, I just think that parents should just
I
be aware that
understand.
there could be changes, so we need to be following them, so I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Ms. Burns, for being here.
Sure.
I was one of the stakeholders involved in the process in Hamilton County. And so,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your work on that. My interest in the plan, which I've read a couple times now, really has to do with the standardized assessment on the front end of education around kindergarten. Our local school district has a great program called Norwood Ready Kids, which maybe you heard about, and it's really an effort to undergird families with children under 5. We've got a safety day that doubles up and makes sure they're safe and have well-being while they're developing. And I feel like we're doing pretty good to pay attention to that population. The data that was shared earlier shows that we're pretty stable over the last 20-ish years in terms of our under 5 population. So as it relates to the plan that's there right now, can you talk a little bit about pros and cons of having a maintained standard for what readiness in kindergarten looks like?
Sure. Districts, there's a menu that they can choose for their diagnostic tests. But we're still in a position, although we're talking about it. I mean, we really are in transition. I'm not trying to be wishy-washy about this, but we do know that a child's brain is 90% developed by age 5. We are learning more and more every day about brain development and how it affects early learners. And we know that we need to get our future scholars and leaders as much developmentally appropriate help as possible. How does the question that we have right now is, how does a state system create a standardized assessment so that we have trends and we have overall data that helps inform what other resources and things that we need to bring to specific districts, specific schools, specific families and their children, right? That is not a universally agreed upon assessment. I will tell you that in my 4 years on the board, I've come to more appreciate benchmarking. I think that in between benchmarking, let's say the 3rd grade reading guarantee, I think to me that could be the benchmark. We need to free up teachers to do their job. They really are the experts, along with the parents, their first teachers, right? So if they know that benchmark, we have lots of research. If you aren't reading at grade level by age 3, really exponentially, you're going to have more trouble, maybe even graduating from high school. That's kind of scary to me, but I've read a lot of research on it. It is kind of it is a fact. But I think we can have that benchmark. That's what we're talking about, and I'm kind of paraphrasing the conversation at the State Department. We can benchmark that in the 3rd grade, but then again, cookie cutters, forget the cookie cutter model. You know your kids best in schools. Parents know their kids best. Get out of their way. Let them do whatever assessments they need, knowing that the benchmark's going to be in the 3rd grade. We're all striving for that goal. I think that can be acceptable. There is a mixed camp on that from the professionals in the field, as well as the professionals that are around the table having this discussion for early childhood education. We did just get a $25 million federal grant, Striving Readers Grant, that's to help address some of that stuff that's going to be awarded, is being awarded currently. Yeah. Kind of a roundabout way, it's complicated. Thanks.
Thank you for
Ms.
your comments.
Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I just have one follow-up. how does the public, how do we as this body stay informed about what's going on and what does get decided in the conversations that are unfolding?
Sure. Well, one thing you can do, we are now on the Ohio channel. So boy, this teacher geek here and me, you know, I tell people, you could watch the Ohio channel and they are all archived. And I don't say that flippantly because really some of these discussions, we'll have an hour or two discussion like you do on things in depth, right? And so that's one way you can do it. But you know, all of your elected officials on the board are, and the appointees, my cell phone number is on the website. I give it to you right now, 513-310-8953. And you can contact me anytime, or I have a blog, so you know I post a lot of like updates, like the graduation requirements, the draft that we moved out of committee last month, and also the interim report card review that we've just taken up again and we're still working on.
Thank you, Ms. Bruns.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Jessica Madsen. And it says candidates for judge. If you can, come up, give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Yes, my name is Jessica Madsen. I live at 2157 Slane Avenue in Norwood. And I had the pleasure 2 weeks ago of hosting a meet and greet for 7 of the candidates on the ballot in November. And I was very, very impressed. All of them came. They spoke to us about the roles of the courts. They all have a lot of experience in the system and have great ideas on how to improve the system. And so I asked if they could come tonight and speak. And so I'd like to introduce Tom Baradone, who can answer some of your questions, and he's running for the court in November. So I appreciate your time.
What's the step?
Hi, my name is Tom Baradone. I'm running for the Court of Common Pleas. I want to congratulate you on your council. It's wonderful to see council. I work for the city of Cincinnati right now, and it's taken us very long to even have one council meeting that is at night, so citizens who work during the day can come and talk and listen. Also, having it on public access is a wonderful idea. We have city cable, but I don't think it even has as much reach as you do. I also want to congratulate you, as I can see it from this window of the Board of Elections with early voting. We've received the totals today that it is the highest total that they have had. One day was today. I'm sure that it's going to get even higher with more people coming and discovering Norwood, the wonderful area around. I have to throw in a little pitch for Taco Casa because God, it's so nice having restaurants right across when you're handing out ballots, having a place to get something to eat. I've been a public defender, a prosecutor, and a civil litigator. And during that time, appearing in the Court of Common Pleas, I was always struck by how not transparent it is. Whereas our elected officials in the legislature and the executive branch feel they have a duty to share everything that happens through doing broadcasts, through publishing reports, through a website. The court has never had that. Right now, our clerk of court keeps records on every arrest, every sentence, every probation, and none of that knowledge is public. The clerk can publish it, but they have not been directed by the judges to do so. The judges have a decision to make if they want their process to be open and transparent. Working in the city of Cincinnati right now, we have a Cincinnati stat that tracks everything that we do. The arrests that our police make, the fines that are given out by our building examiners, and the public is able to go into the portal and check those things. The same kind of data is being collected by the courts, but they have not yet taken the step to make that information public. That's one of the platforms that we're running on right now. Myself and Terry Nestor and Pavan Parikh are all running for the Court of Common Pleas. The things that we're talking about are changing the way things have always been done in the courthouse and bringing new ideas in. As I said, opening up all the data. Right now, Hamilton County is the only county in the state that does not draw their juries from state IDs, licenses. We only do it from voter registration. We're allowed to do that. That would help expand our jury pool so that it is more reflective of the people who are here in Hamilton County, which includes Norwood. Right now, we have a $40 a day for our jurors. That's less than $5 an hour. That's less than minimum wage. That's less than minimum wage for a teenager. That's almost less than minimum wage for a server. And yet we expect these people to take time off from their work, sit there and pay full attention. We need to address these issues. We need to raise that amount. That's going to take effort. It's going to take work. but that's what we're willing to do. One of the other things that we're very passionate about also is, bond reform. As it stands right now in Hamilton County, the bond is determined your ability to get out of jail once you've been arrested. The probable cause for arrest, you have not been found guilty, is based on your ability to pay to get out. We have the metrics in our pretrial division that can show people who are a flight risk, who are a danger to the community. Those people need a high bond so they can not get out. But if people show that they will return for court and they are not a danger to the community, there is no reason why they need to be held in our jail for $140 a day while they have not been convicted of anything. The money that we waste on people being held at this point, we could be using on other things. We have issues at our jail right now that need to be addressed, that our sheriff says need to be done. We have an opioid crisis that we are not dealing with in the jail because we don't have the funds to treat people. Simply the detox is being there and sitting and waiting it out. The money that we could save by having people released, we could put into treatment and help break the cycle of people going in and out of jail. These are all new ideas that we want to bring. This is the first time since I have been an attorney, since in 1999, that we have had a full slate of judges on the ballot. I'm sorry. Really quickly, that means is that this is the first year when you look, there will be one name, the two names on every race that you look at. I'd ask that you look at Our Judges Matter, electbaradon.com, to find out more about why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
taking
No,
some-
that's okay. Thank
appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you for your patience in waiting this long to speak.
Not at all.
So
Thank you.
we appreciate that. We'll move on to unfinished business. I'm going to give you my update again on the C9 and Millennium plans. In an effort to try to clear up all of the claims, I want you to know that there recently have been bills of $16,034.34 submitted to the city in terms of trying to catch up for the C9 payments. Two, if not three, of the claims have already had requisitions and purchase orders filed for those, so hopefully that money will be sent to Benovation for distribution to the retirees. And from the Millennium Plan, the healthcare plan, there was a bill of $25,308.32. And again, a requisition has been completed for that. So we have, so far this year, have made payments of about $200,000 in back payments to the retirees, making progress while we're not totally caught up. One thing that we do need to, I appreciate that you passed the S&S resolution. There's another issue in terms of the Symetra stop-loss plan that I spoke about at the last meeting. It's the plan for large claims if anyone has, catastrophic medical bills. We currently pay, Mr. Stith, correct me if I'm wrong, $22,000 per month?
It's
for that.
It's fuzzy as to exactly how much that is because Benovation adds their fees into that.
Okay.
So if you're getting information from Haran that says 22,000, that's probably the number that actually it cost us, but we're paying anywhere from 26 to 28,000 for that to Benovation.
So that 22,000, that Symetra plan also expires on October 31st. So the question became whether we wanted to continue that for 2 months. I told you I would look into that. The folks at Symetra confirmed by email that we have had no claims against that for 3 years, that everyone who could potentially had this has had this plan as a primary plan should now be eligible for Medicare. And my understanding is that if they have not applied for Medicare, if they then submitted a bill, and I don't have this in writing, but if they did not apply for Medicare and submitted a bill to us, that the process is that this is a secondary insurance and that the company would have reduced whatever the payment by whatever Medicare would have paid for it at any rate. So the question still remains, do we ask to have the stop-loss coverage extended for 2 months from November 1st, 2018 through 12/31/2018? Or do we, the recommendation was made to us that perhaps we could put the $22,000 for the 2 months in an escrow account to handle any potential claims that came. So in my conversation with Mr. Gears, he wants direction from council as to how you want to proceed. This is not a decision that he makes. Mr. Gears, do you have anything else to add to this? I did okay job on, okay. So we are looking for direction. Someone to continue or not continue. Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. Can you provide some context around the timeline in which we need to provide feedback?
If we want to extend, again, it expires October 31, the same as the contract with Benovation. And so if we want to extend it, we need to have Julie Topol reach out to them, and we either need to let them know whether we want to extend it for 1 month, 2 months, or not renew. I think it will automatically renew unless we say otherwise. I'm pretty sure. Because we have renewed it year after year after year. If you don't mind, I will check in my emails. Does anyone else have any other questions while I'm looking this up? Yes, Mr. Thompson.
This is just to finish out the year.
Correct. Because we will not provide that service anymore. The Millennium Plan will be gone as of 12/31. That's correct. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. This is a question for whoever can answer it. It's a stop loss, so how much does the loss have to be in order for this to stop it?
My understanding is that anything over $10,000, then this covers. We have to cover the stop losses, anything. The Millennium Plan, that we would be on the hook for $10,000, the first $10,000, and anything over $10,000 is then covered by the Symetra stop loss plan. Please?
That's per claim.
Per claim.
Per claim.
Yes. She said the Symetra liability is minimal. It appears that 1 or 2 retirees may have exposure, and then we confirmed that it appears that all retirees are over the age of 65, so they should have other coverage. And my understanding is that we need to let them know one way or the other whether we intend to. I think if we don't pay it, I guess they're going to assume that we're not covered. But we need to let them know one way or the other.
So just to follow up then.
Yes,
on that,
Mr. Bonsall.
If you don't, thank you so much. So, okay, everybody on this plan is supposed to have Medicare or like another coverage, right? This is not a primary coverage.
It's written that this is a secondary coverage. Mr. Stith, you can confirm that?
I don't know. I'm not involved in the
I thought you
purchasing of the coverage. We just pay the bills when they come in.
Does any, I guess.
Madam President?
Yes.
My understanding is the way it's set up is there generally there's a period you retire, and the way this is originally set up, you're not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, and there are people that may not have been under the pension plan, their insurance companies, but that the city would still insure them, and the city would cover if they had a medical something that came up. Okay, the city will cover the first 10 grand. We'll just do that at a general fund if we have a claim like that. Anything beyond that, though, if somebody gets, liver cancer and they've got $2 million worth of treatments, that's what this is designed to cover. More and more people have moved into, pretty much everybody's eligible for Medicare. But that's the idea, is it's reinsurance. Most of them would be under a state pension fund insurance plan before they turned 65, but there was some in there. But that was the idea. It's like we may get other claims, and anything that those funds those things don't pay, then filters down to the city, and the city just writes checks for those. It's just for anything that's huge that isn't covered someplace else. That's what this reinsurance, kind of a reinsurance policy was for. That's why there's that $10,000 gap.
Yeah. And just to
All right, so, thank you. So, spoke with underwriting and they have provided a firm 11-1 Symetra stop-loss renewal for the city of Norwood. Continuation of in-force rates for another renewal period. Should they decide to stop coverage at any point during the stop-loss renewal period, they can do so by letting us know in writing when the decision is made or via HRAN. Just need to obtain confirmation of renewal via email confirmation from the client. Any questions, let me know. Mr. Bonsall.
Okay, so a follow-up question. Do we then, it sounded like what you said was that if somebody, this is supposed to be a secondary plan, so if somebody doesn't have, like, isn't electing into their Medicare coverage and they're potentially, but probably not, but potentially it's only 1 or 2 people, then would we be able to reject that claim or not pay that because this is a secondary plan?
I think that's a legal question that I am not prepared to answer, and I doubt that Mr. Moore is, but you can take a stab at it, Mr. Moore.
From what I understand, now if it actually happens and somebody sues us, I'm not going to guarantee this is the answer. From what I understand, the idea would be that, well, no, you had the opportunity to have other insurance. This is a reinsurance. Under the terms of this, you are kind of required to sign up for that. If you don't, we can offset whatever you would have recovered, whatever Medicare would have paid for, we're going to offset from what we pay. And certainly that's the position I would take.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So in that case, I mean, I would recommend that we do not extend this plan personally. $22,000 a month. Actually, it almost sounds like we probably this should have been evaluated in the past, but it is what it is. So
there's lots of things that should have been evaluated
yes.
in the past. Trust me, the more I got into this, the worse it got.
Yeah, I am. It makes me even more thankful that this council voted to move a different direction starting next year. So yeah, I would just say my recommendation is to not renew the plan.
We probably need a motion.
Well, I'll move that we do not renew the plan.
Is there a second? Mr. Thompson. So the motion on the floor is to not renew the stop-loss plan, the Symetra stop-loss plan. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to ask, just as a point of clarity, we're talking about whether or not we'd like to indicate to the Safety Service Director if we want to continue to pay for stop-loss coverage through the end of 2018.
Correct.
And right now, our understanding is it costs $22,000 a month.
Correct.
And we anticipate there could be 1 or 2 persons who might need to take advantage of this, as in they don't have eligibility for their coverage?
In the past, there were people who were under the age of 65 who potentially could have had exposure and we could have had exposure on. Since both of the folks that we know of are over 65, they should have primary coverage under Medicare. And this, as Mr. Moore pointed out, is a secondary coverage. So they should have Medicare. That would be the first payee in any medical claims that are incurred by the retiree or those currently covered under the plan. Mr. Sanker.
Could there potentially be any of these claims from back in 2016 and 17 that could have been catastrophic in dollars to the retiree, just hadn't submitted the bills yet?
My supposition would be if they hadn't submitted them yet, they probably would be taken to collection or something. I mean, they would have been submitted, they should have been submitted to our Millennium Plan for the first $10,000, and that has not happened. I guess potentially they could be hanging out there, but people would need to have paid those up front. Because I'm sure that a hospital or a physician is not going to wait 2 years to be paid. And we did go back 3 years. There are no claims in 3 years. Yes, Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I mean, I would suspect, that if that were to happen, I mean, we had insurance coverage for that period. So even if we say we're not going to renew it and somebody has $1 million claim on October 31st, and they don't submit it to us till November 15th, we're still covered because we have the coverage at the time, the date of service. So I mean, that's how I kind of understand insurance to work, but I'm not for sure on that. That's just what I would suspect.
I think that is correct. Any insurance. Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I do have one more question, and it's for the law director. If there were to be a suit that could arise out of this lack of coverage, would you anticipate it being equal to the cost of maintaining the coverage?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. There's just no possible way to know. I mean, the idea here was that the city, I mean, this was originally set up, the idea the city's going to pay for your health care costs. And there were things that trickled down through that. People that had coverage through somewhere else, there would still be co-pays or whatever that would trickle down, and the city would pick that up. And so the city got for the potential claims, it could be really big. It could be really big. If we get to the point where somebody actually, if there's somebody out there that doesn't have other coverage or something that is not covered under that other coverage, and comes back to the city on it, it's a medical bill. I mean, it could be $150. It could be $1,000 because I went to the emergency room, had a serious fever, and they gave me Tylenol. It could be $2 million because there was 6 months of chemotherapy and radiation. I mean, I don't know. It's medical claim. Given today's medical expense amounts, I mean, in theory, there's like no limit on what that could possibly be. So I don't really have a good way to answer that. Maybe Madam President or Mr. Stiff would have a better idea on what that stuff is.
Mr. Stith?
I can tell you, year-to-date to 9/30/2018, the retiree's health care key, not the C9 trust, but the actual insurance key, had paid out $356,074. Now, if we're assuming a $22,000 a month insurance cost of $198,000, you're basically looking at another $158,000 that was out of pocket for the city for those 9 months. That's before hitting that $10,000. So when the retiree goes to the doctor's office and they bill their Medicare, Medicare pays what they're going to pay. Then anything that's not paid comes to the city through Benovation, who makes its payment. And like I said, we've paid so far this year, not including October, about $158,000 to those doctor bills or other medical bills, plus the cost of insurance. That's why that's $356,000. The C9 Trust is reimbursement. That's total. As of 9/30/2018, it was $258,379 paid in that. So just about $600,000 with the two added together. But seeing that we are responsible for paying these bills, it's just that nobody has hit as an individual that $10,000 mark yet. That's the discussion that went on for at least 2 years, 2 or 3, I think it's 2 years. Nobody's had to kick in that $10,000 yet. But there still are bills that are paid and coming in, and we should still expect those. Hopefully they will not exceed the normal rate plus $22,000 a month.
So we right now have the coverage through 12/31/18.
The coverage through,
Symetra, the stop loss.
I thought it's November 1st it ended.
I said we have it through 10/31/18.
I'm sorry, I misheard you.
Yes, 10/31/18, so the end of this month. So November the 1st is we either need to renew or we will not have coverage. Please.
There's a motion on the floor.
I know, I'm waiting to see if anyone has any other discussion. Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. It's getting late, and I just want to see if I paraphrase correctly what you're telling me. We currently have coverage in place through the end of the year.
No. 10/31/18 is the...
So we're just talking about if we want to add it for 2 months. We need to renew.
Correct. If we want to continue it for 2 months.
Got it.
So we signed the same contract, the same time frame. We had contracts with Benovation and Symetra. So both of those contracts either renewed or expired at the same time. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to not renew the Symetra stop-loss policy for November and December of 2018. Everyone clear on that? All right, call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonjol?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
No.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
By a vote of 5-1, the motion carries. Quick update on safe routes to school. You'll notice there is construction going on. Mr. Gears and I received one change order today, and it was just to move a manhole cover and a sewer pipe or a drain, and there was no added cost. So to date, there have been no other change orders and no other added costs. So look for, if you've been by Allison and Sherman, that corner is going to look incredibly different. It's kind of lined up a little bit better so that the children going to and from school will be able to have a much safer crosswalk. They'll be able to actually cross at the corner instead of having to walk down the street to cross the street. And a lot of the crosswalks on Sherman Avenue will be redesigned. Work is taking place on all of the schools, so they are supposed to be done by the end of this month, so look for lots of construction. So really, really happy with those changes taking place. Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question about that intersection at Allison and Sherman. Are there going to be crosswalk lights put in?
I don't remember. I know we talked about lights, the lighting, and I think that was going to be our last. We've applied so many times, I don't remember. I want to say no. We applied for that to do the same thing, to redo the traffic lights and the pedestrian lights, and there wasn't enough foot traffic there. Deb Robinson and I did the foot count and the traffic count ourselves, and I can look into that, but I think the answer is no. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. If I can remember from my discussions with Deb and with you, especially this iteration, it's not going to be the crosswalk lights because one, the lighting system for that traffic light I don't think will support crosswalk lights.
Yeah, it needed a whole new electrical system and everything, and the cost was way expensive, and there wasn't enough traffic.
Yeah, it was like in this last go-around, we applied just for that intersection to replace the traffic light and add crosswalk, indicators. But for the high cost of that, the state didn't approve our application because they were essentially going to be spending $300,000 to add crosswalk indicators. So it wasn't, the cost benefit for them wasn't there. So yeah, it will not be there now. So I would just advise motorists to be very careful because I've crossed that intersection as a pedestrian multiple times. And it's very hard to see the traffic light when you're crossing that intersection as a pedestrian. So just know that kids could be crossing erratically because they just don't know when it's their time to cross or not.
I see the director the person that we submitted our grant to, ODOT, comes to the monthly meetings, and I see him and I harass him every month and tell him that we're going to apply again and we fully expect to get it, so we'll see what happens. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Thompson.
Okay, thank you. Back to Innovations. I was contacted today by a retiree whose check had bounced. We had talked about that.
I forgot about that. That's another thing in my spare time.
And they have yet to receive their non-bounced check.
Yes. So when, like I said, I would be so glad to not have this company. So when our check was sent to them, the way it happens is the check goes to Innovation. It gets deposited into an account that says City of Norwood Retirees, unfortunately. So then they generate checks, and they don't have printed checks like the City of Norwood has printed checks, and then you just fill them in on the printer. They actually print these on a computer, and so the person who was entering the amounts in the checks, on 7 of the checks, transpose the account number on the last two numbers of the account on 7 of the checks. And so while all the checks went out, I have a list of the 7 people who, unfortunately, when they deposited their checks, found out that they bounced. So that's why I have so many emails. I couldn't get through them to find the answer about Julie Topol. So those were supposed to have been reissued, and anyone who has, I'm sure they have bounced charges. If they get a screenshot of that, or if they can have a printout and send that either to me or to Benovation, they will be reimbursed for those bounce charges. I expected that those checks were mailed out last week because we made them aware of it. When I called yesterday I've sent plenty of emails and I can't get anybody to return my emails anymore, so I have a new person that I found a phone number for. So I now called her and she said, well, I think that was already taken care of. Let me get back to you. And when she got back to me, she sent me a copy of the emails that said, oh, I thought they had been changed from voucher to payment. I'm sorry, that was never made. So that was changed yesterday to allow the payments. Again, it looks bad on our part. We had nothing to do with it. It was Benovation. And again, the check says City of Norwood retiree account. So it looks as though the City of Norwood bounced checks, but it was anything but that. I think all 7 people have been made aware of that, and they should be made, I think they were aware of the sending in the charge. I just received one in the mail today from someone from Florida, so hopefully we can get that resolved. I forgot to tell you about that. Mrs. Sanderhan.
With that said, I want to share our little story here. I walk into Benovation, so I decide I'm going down there. Walk in the front door, and it takes them a while to come out. I ask for the 2 people. I come out and take care of the little bit of business I had, and they're going to go walk away. I said, wait a minute, stop, hold on. I dialed Donna's phone number and I said, hey Donna, you know those 2 women, Sarah and Larissa here, who won't answer your calls? And she's like, yes. I said, oh, here they are. And I handed them my phone, and the look on her face. It was wonderful, except I had to wait around for another half an hour while Donna laid into her because they had my phone. But it was kind of fun to do.
And I want to share an email that came by after, if I can find it again. And this is typical of what we have had to deal with. Someone had sent in their information last year and still had not gotten reimbursed. And so during this latest go-around, sent in a letter that said, when am I to expect this? She kind of sent in a letter that had just numbers in it. It wasn't the bills or anything. This basically saying this is what I sent you, and so when they sent me a list of questions that they had about how to deal with certain things, one of the things was, well, do you want us to just go ahead and pay this person from the letter that they sent in, or how do you want us to handle it? And I said, you can't just pay it from a letter that somebody sent you. I want you to go back and get the bills that they sent in and, make sure you did that. I can't find it. So didn't answer me. So after Mrs. Hanrahan was there and we chatted about it on the phone, she came back on and said, oh, I sent you an email about that. I said, really, when was that? About 5 minutes ago. And the email said, oh, thanks for reminding me. I didn't see that. I just printed it out. So when you're hearing the stories from the retirees that this stuff is happening, we can verify that it's really happening. I think this new plan will be so much easier. It will be a relief for all of us. So thank you for that, Mrs. Hanrahan, by the way. And thank you, Mr. Thompson. I totally forgot about the bounce checks. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. It's extremely frustrating to me, and I know that you've worked very hard, President Lake, but it's just, it's like the last stab in the back, like as they're walking out the door, it's extremely frustrating. So I just hope that, and want to encourage, after November 1st, when we're with this new agency, if there's any bills that haven't been paid, or if people feel like there's claims that haven't been paid, to resubmit them to the new one, and they'll get it figured out. I mean, they've got stuff together and stuff going, and I'm looking forward to it. And I really hope they have a better process for check processing, because this is it's just a shame that that happened. So.
And now that we know we can have a contract with S&S, we will make sure that we get a contact as to who they should send their bills to and get that out to the retirees right away.
Great.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you, Madam President. I want to call our attention back to the first ordinance we considered. We did 2 readings tonight, and that was in large part as an effort to create time for residents to express views. And I just wanted to underscore, if residents have things they want to communicate, please email us. As a public body, it really helps to have public records. That's what creates transparency. And while there might be discussions or dialogue that happens outside of this room, I am most helped to help residents if I have information I can bring into this setting. So I really want to encourage folks, call or email. Our contact information is online if you feel like you have something to say.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Okay. Move on to communications. The first is the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding a transfer of license to Stoney's Pub and Grub. This was sent out to all of the police, fire, health, building, tax, and there were no objections, which were returned. Thank you for that, update, Mr. Gibbs. It's a transfer of a D1, D2, D3, and D6 license, apparently sold. Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Madam President. So since there were no objections, and also I want to note, this is not a Trex transfer before, we get quite a few inquiries on that. This is just a sale of the business at the existing location, so new owners will be operating there. But I would move that we receive and file, I guess, the notice and take no additional actions.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is the letter from Mayor Williams regarding executive session.
Dear Madam President and members of council, I write to ask that the council consider holding an executive session at its regularly scheduled meeting Tuesday, October 23rd, 2018, as permitted by Ohio Revised Code, Section 121.22G4, to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment. If you have any questions regarding this matter, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Bonso.
Thank you, Madam President. So I would move that we enter executive session to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment. And I would move that we would have a 5-minute recess before entering that executive session.
Seconded by Ms. Stevenson and everybody. Receive and file. So the motion on the floor is to receive and file. Go into executive session for the purpose stated in the letter to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations and bargaining sessions. And I will definitely call a 5-minute recess. It doesn't need to be part of your motion. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We will move into executive session, so we ask those who are in the audience to exit. We will come back into regular session just for the purpose of excusing absent members and adjourning. Thank you. And we will have a 5-minute recess. Please be back by 10:20.
It is too late.
All right, we are out of executive session and back into regular session. We do have one absent member, Mr. Bonso,
Thank you, Madam President. I would move that we excuse the absent member.
seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Ms. Stevenson,
I move that we adjourn.
seconded by Mr. Bonso. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.